Last week we began a sermon series on the mission and vision statements for Beulah Church. So I'm going to ask you to open your bulletin and look at those statements on the back couple pages. And what I would like for us to do is to read together the mission statement. It's short enough, and I'm hoping that over time we can learn that statement so that when people ask the question, well, what is Beulah all about, we'll be able to say it. So let's read that statement together. Beulah Church, reaching out to welcome and serve others in the name of Jesus Christ. Now I will go on to read the first part of the vision statement, and that's what we're going to talk about this morning. Our vision for how the mission will look. We reach out to others in any direction, whether it's Malawi or Garfield or our own Penn Hills, by listening to our neighbors and learning of their needs, responding in love, and sharing the light of Christ. So by these two statements, what we are saying is that we have a commitment to go. We have a commitment to reach out to our immediate community, to even beyond and around the world. And then we have a commitment to listen to our neighbors, to learn what the needs are, that we may respond as God leads us and share the light of Christ. It's really about caring. It's a way of living and a way of interacting with people that is modeled after the caring and loving ministry of Jesus Christ. And certainly a prime example of the caring way that Jesus interacted with people is in our Zacchaeus story for this morning. Zacchaeus was a tax collector in Jericho. But he wasn't just a tax collector, he was a chief tax collector. He was high up in the corrupt tax system of the Roman government. Now, local tax collectors would charge people much more beyond the tax, so that they could line their own pockets and those of the authorities above them. Tax collectors were despised by the Jewish people. They were considered unclean because they collaborated with the enemy, with the oppressive Roman government. Now, on that day that Jesus visited Jericho, Zacchaeus wanted to see him. Well, he goes out and he begins to try to work his way through the crowd to where Jesus is passing by, and he can't do it because he's a short man, and not only that, he's hated by the people. So I'm sure we can imagine that some of the people seeing Zacchaeus might notice he's trying to get through and just conveniently just move to stand in front of him, keeping him from seeing Jesus. But Zacchaeus was determined. So what did he do? He hiked up his robes and ran down the street ahead of Jesus, and he climbed up a sycamore tree. Quite undignified for a Middle Eastern wealthy man. But as I say, Zacchaeus was determined. So there he was up in the tree watching for Jesus through the branches. And Jesus came to the spot, and he looked up and he said, "Zacchaeus, come down here and hurry up, because I'm going to stay with you at your house." So pretty much Jesus invited himself. But Zacchaeus didn't mind. In fact, he was thrilled about it, because he was ready for an encounter with Jesus. Now, what is it that Jesus was doing here? Well, he was extending grace to the sinner. Jesus was allowing Zacchaeus to extend hospitality to him. Remember, I talked about this last week, how being invited to someone's home was such a great honor. Being invited to dine with someone was just a tremendous honor that wasn't given to just anyone. And we can imagine that Zacchaeus, as hated as he was, didn't have that many friends in the community. But here Jesus allows him to extend hospitality, to extend this honor. Jesus shows grace and mercy. And the result is that Zacchaeus is changed. He's changed so much that he vows to dispose of most of his wealth and to pay back all those that he had cheated. That's real transformation. And people's lives can be transformed by our ministries of serving and caring. People's lives can be transformed because we are the conduits through which God's Spirit pours out to others. People can be transformed because we are willing to be in relationship with people, because we are willing to listen, and because we are willing to accept without judgment. And so the first point is a willingness to be in relationship with other people. The light and the love of Jesus, the message of Jesus, is best shared in the context of relationship. Other more impersonal methods of evangelism really don't work so well. Years ago, there were thousands of religious tracts that were dropped from a plane over China. Someone had that great idea, thinking that thousands of people would be reached in this way. But the problem was that most of the Chinese people couldn't read. So it wasn't an effective way of reaching people for Christ. The better way is through developing relationships. Because when we develop relationships with people, trust grows. And there's a willingness to share on a deeper level and open up about spiritual questions. And friends, many people in our society are looking for relationship. U.S. population studies over the past 20 to 25 years have shown a dramatic increase in the number of people who live alone. And this particular research group defined isolated individuals as those who were unmarried, those who did not socialize much with family or friends, and those who were not a part of voluntary organizations. But the most important indicator of someone's poor health as a result of isolation was whether or not they felt isolated. In other words, it's not necessarily about being isolated, it's about feeling isolated. So think about Zacchaeus. He was a social outcast. And yet Jesus made himself available to him. He stayed in his home. He spent time with him. Now, in our society today, what is the most important gift you can give someone? It's time. Time. There are people who are desperate to have someone care enough just to spend time with them. And certainly a lot of those individuals are social outcasts in a sense. People in homeless shelters and prisons and nursing homes. But even closer to home, I believe that on virtually every block, in every neighborhood, is at least one person who needs a friend. One person. It may be an older person, someone who has lost a spouse. Or it might be a young mother who stays at home all day with small children. It may be a sick person or someone who has recently retired or lost a job. If we want to care and share the way Jesus did, then we need to make ourselves available to people. People will be transformed as we are willing to be in relationship with them. People are also transformed as we are willing to listen. We need to listen to find out what the needs are in someone's life. And this means at times going below the surface, being willing to listen for what those deeper issues are. Now, Jesus looked at Zacchaeus and he didn't see him as a short man, a rich man, or a tax collector, a sinner. He looked at him and he saw that this was a man that needed God's grace in his life. Zacchaeus needed God to restore as well as to his community. We get so wrapped up in our own concerns that we oftentimes don't see the needs that are very visible around us. Sometimes it's a matter of really listening. Christian writer and pastor Chuck Swindoll once found himself with too many commitments in too few days. And he writes that he was getting very angry and tense about it. He said, "I was snapping at my wife and children, choking down my food at meal times, and feeling irritated at those unexpected interruptions that come up throughout the day." He said, "I remember after supper one evening, my daughter wanted to tell me something important about what happened to her at school that day. And so she said, 'Daddy, I want to tell you something, and I promise I'll tell you really fast.'" Well, when Chuck heard that, he was very convicted. And he said to his daughter, "Honey, you can tell me, and you don't have to rush. Just tell me slowly." And the little girl responded, "Okay, Daddy, then listen slowly." Author Robert Heron said that good listening is like a radio station. You have to tune in to one station at a time. You can't listen to more than one at a time. So you and I are called to, at times, put aside our own concerns and tune in to what someone is saying, what needs someone has. We're called to listen slowly. People can be transformed as we are willing to be in relationship, as we are willing to listen, and as we are willing to accept without judgment. There was a 5-year-old girl who watched the movie Cinderella. And after the movie, she decided to pretend that she was the fairy godmother. So she went up to her mom, and she had a little pinwheel for a magic wand. And she said to her mom, "I will grant you 3 wishes. And so the mother said, "Okay, my first wish is that I wish for world peace." And so the little girl waved her wand and she said, "I have granted your wish." And then the mom said, "My second wish is that all the sick children in the world would be instantly healed." And the little girl waved her wand and she said, "Your wish is granted." Well, Mom was a little bit overweight, and so her third wish was that she would have a nice, slim, and trim figure. And the little girl frowned deeply, and then she began waving her wand back and forth, and she said, "I don't know, Mom, I don't think I have enough power for this one." No, people need acceptance without judgment. Jesus didn't say to Zacchaeus, "Clean up your act. When you stop collecting taxes, then I'll come to your house." As someone once said, we err greatly if we require others to get good before we help them get God. We must accept people as they are without judgment. This is the essence of unconditional love. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to accept bad behavior or poor choices, but it means accepting people where they are so that we can help them move forward in their lives. Jesus did not leave Zacchaeus the same way he found him. As a result of Jesus extending that grace and mercy, Zacchaeus was transformed. And that's the message today, is that people can be transformed by our actions. We are the conduits of God's life and love flowing out to those that we meet. Now, this is a true story. It's from an article that appeared in the Huntsville Daily Times, January 1930. Britain's King George V was to give the opening address at the World Disarmament Conference. And the address was to be transmitted to the United States via radio. Well, as the broadcast was about to begin, one of the cables broke, and more than 1 million listeners were left without sound. So a junior mechanic in the station, a man named Harold Vivian, solved the problem by picking up both ends of the cable and allowing 250 volts of electricity to pass through to restore the circuit. He managed to hang on without a break for 20 minutes until new wires could be connected. He was the living link for the king's message to get through. You see the comparison. We are the living links for God's love to reach others. So today, as I close, I leave you with some questions to think about and pray about in the coming week. The first question is, how are you listening? Has God brought someone into your life who needs a listening ear? And how are you responding to what you are hearing? What needs is God bringing to your attention that you could fill? And then finally, how are you sharing Jesus Christ? And what difference might it make in the lives of others if you would share the light and love of Christ? Beulah Church, reaching out, listening, responding, and sharing, that all may know the transforming power and love of Jesus Christ. Amen.